Subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon so that you know when live we go. Hello and welcome to today's DNS session. We shall be discussing on important articles from the explained section of the Indian Express relevant for civil service examination and also the relevant articles from today's The Hindu. There is an explained article concerning the doctrine of pleasure of the governor. There is also an article in the Hindu newspaper in the F&Q section, What is the Doctrine of Pleasure? Both the articles are in the context of Governor Khan of Kerala asking the chief minister to dismiss one of the minister. Recently, the relation between the governor, the chief minister and his cabinet ran into bad weather. Initially, there were some issues regarding the appointment of vice chancellors in the State University of Kerala. And then one of the minister of Karnataka cabinet made some personal remark against the governor, and governor found it to be not befitting coming from a minister. So the governor has declared that the minister does not enjoy his pleasure anymore, and hence asked the chief minister to take constitutionally appropriate action against him. Now, in order to understand the position of the governor in this situation, we will discuss the doctrine of pleasure in detail. That will apply not only to governor, but in general, the public servants under the union and the state government. Because you understand how the nature of exam is. UPSC does not exactly ask what is in news, but it asks peripheral things or the larger topic that covers the issue. And that larger topic has been rightly picked up by the Hindu, which is the doctrine of pleasure. See, the concept of the doctrine of pleasure has its origin in England. There it is the special prerogative of the British Crown. The Crown can dismiss from the service any servant of the Crown at its pleasure. So the tenure of office of a civil servant can be terminated any time without assigning any cause. Even if there exists any special contract between the Crown and the civil servant, the Crown is not bound by it. And the civil servant can be dismissed without any notice. They cannot claim any damage for the wrongful dismissal or immature termination of the services. Nothing. This is the doctrine of pleasure. They have their own justification for it. They say that the Crown works for the public policy, which means that the sovereign authority has to work in public interest. And if the continuance of a public servant is against public service, then he must be relieved from his office. Now, the doctrine of pleasure under Indian Constitution is also based on the same policy consideration, but still it is not exactly the same. We have adopted it from the common law of England, but when we have adopted it, we also have adapted. The doctrine of pleasure as it exists in the Indian Constitution is substantially different from the original concept of the doctrine of pleasure of the British Crown. The doctrine of pleasure has been embodied in Indian Constitution under Article 310. The article reads like this: except as expressly provided by this Constitution, meaning there is an exception to this clause of this article. But the provision of this article is this: every person who is a member of a defense service or of a civil service of the Union or of an all India service or holds any post connected with defense or any civil post under the Union holds office under the pleasure of the President. And every person who is a member of a civil service of a state or holds any civil post under a state holds office during the pleasure of the governor of the state. This is the general rule. And the exception is if the Constitution expressly provides for any other provision. So this means that the doctrine is subject to constitutional limitations. So whenever there will be a specific provision in the Constitution given to the civil servant or the public servant any kind of tenure different from that provided under Article 310, then the servant would be excluded from the operation of doctrine of pleasure. And there have been many exceptions like this. Many servants are expressly excluded by the Constitution from the rule of pleasure, like the Supreme Court judges, as provided under Article 124, the Auditor General under Article 148, the High Court judges under Article 217 and 218, a member of Public Service Commission under Article 317, and the Chief Election Commissioner. You please name the article for this. Apart from these, there is a check on the doctrine of pleasure in the immediate next article to Article 310. Article 311 puts some check. It says that the dismissal of the public servants shall not be done by any authority subordinate to the one which has appointed the public servant. The public servants, before being removed, must be given a reasonable opportunity of being heard. This is based on the principle of natural justice. There must also be some inquiry conducted before the removal. But the same article also puts some exception to this rule of inquiry. Inquiry may not be done when there is a criminal charge against the public servant, or when it is not reasonably practicable to hold such inquiry, or when such inquiry is not in the interest of security of the state. So the thing is that Article 311 puts a check on the practice of the doctrine of pleasure. There are other articles that we have already seen. These also put a check on the doctrine of pleasure. Doctrine of pleasure is not absolute. In the beginning of Article 310, Clause 1, it is said, except as expressly provided by this Constitution. And the Constitution expressly provides for the exception in these articles. The Constitution also lays some check in Article 311. Apart from these, the fundamental rights guaranteed under the Constitution are also restrictions on the doctrine of pleasure. This doctrine cannot be resorted to freely and unfairly. Articles 14, 15, 16, they all impose limitation on free exercise of doctrine of pleasure. Article 14, as you understand, embodies a very important judicial doctrine, the doctrine of reasonableness. The principle or the doctrine of reasonableness is antithesis to arbitrariness. In addition to Article 14 of the Constitution, Article 15 also restricts arbitrary exercise of power in matters of services. Article 15 prohibits termination of services on grounds of religion, race, caste, sex, or place of birth. Article 16 obligates equal treatment and bars arbitrary discrimination. In the newspaper, you must have been reading this doctrine of reasonableness in other cases as well. Supreme Court has given very high importance to this doctrine. Many of the laws have been changed based upon the principle or the doctrine of reasonableness. Even the classifications that the government does, let's say for termination of pregnancy, all of that has to pass the test of the principle of reasonableness. The doctrine of pleasure also has to pass the test. It cannot be arbitrary. Supreme Court by various means has tried to strengthen rule of law, and in a sense, to say critically, it also has endowed on itself huge amount of power. I'll give you certain case laws where Supreme Court has diluted this doctrine of pleasure even further. But the doctrine of pleasure also has been restricted by the general law of the land. If there is a law on the contract of civil servants, the governor or the president cannot arbitrarily break the law and relieve the public servant from the service. See, in the state of Bihar versus Abdul Majid case, Supreme Court refused to follow the rule of doctrine of pleasure. In this case, a sub-inspector of police was dismissed from the service on the ground of cowardice. But later, government had to reinstate him in the service. Then there was a contention whether during the time of dismissal, the salary is now to be paid to the sub-inspector. Supreme Court in this case upheld the claim of the sub-inspector and directed that even the salary has to be paid for the duration of dismissal. So the doctrine of pleasure is not at all absolute. It has to pass the test of reasonableness. The executive power has to pass the test of reasonableness. Supreme Court reiterated the same stand in Om Prakash versus the state of Uttar Pradesh case. Supreme Court said that if there is a law that governs the dismissal of civil servant, then that law cannot be broken. The dismissal or the practice of doctrine of pleasure cannot be unlawful. Supreme Court in Jaswant Singh versus the state of Punjab. You must remember this case. The court here held that the final decision of the governor or the president can be tested in the court of law. This judgment was in the context of Article 311, Clause 3. See, in this article of 311 that we have discussed, there is a clause 3 here. We have discussed that there are 3 restrictions on the inquiry. Inquiry is not necessary if the case against the public servant has a criminal charge, or it is not practically possible to do the inquiry, or the inquiry is not in the interest of the security of the state. Now, who will make these decisions, whether it is practically possible or not, or whether it is not in the interest of the security of the state? The final decision will come from the authority that has the power to dismiss or remove the public servant, meaning the governor or the president. But even the final decision of this authority can be challenged in the court of law. I told you Supreme Court has diluted the practice of doctrine of pleasure even more than what check has been given by the Constitution itself. The Supreme Court, under the power of judicial review, has brought that practice of doctrine of pleasure under its review, diluting Article 311 Clause 3 further. In Union of India versus Balbir Singh case, Supreme Court said that if the court finds that the circumstances has no bearing whatsoever on the security of the state was another factor for not conducting the inquiry. But if the court finds out that the circumstance has no bearing over the security of the state, the court can hold that satisfaction of the president or the governor in bypassing the inquiry has been done on wholly extraneous or irrelevant consideration. So again, the doctrine of pleasure will not apply. Supreme Court in Union of India versus Tulsi Ram Patel case has held that the pleasure doctrine was neither a relic of the feudal age, nor was it based on special prerogative of the British Crown, but was based upon public policy, meaning the servants work for public interest. So it is not actually your own pleasure that you have to work upon with. You have to look at the public interest. And public interest comes when your action is reasonable, not arbitrary. For public interest, judicial review is quintessential. Public interest also requires the fundamental rights of citizens to be kept intact. And hence these naturally becomes the restriction on the practice of doctrine of pleasure. See, doctrine of pleasure was important because the constitution makers were aware of the discrepancies that may come up later, like the challenges of corruption that may creep into civil services. They knew it. So in order to not grant complete immunity to dishonest or corrupt government servants at the public expense, they wanted this doctrine in the constitution. And the doctrine is present in the constitution explicitly under Article 310. But Article 311 acts as a check, trying to bring reasonableness in the application of the doctrine. And the judiciary, in the context of limited departmental appeal, has ensured that the power to dismiss is not misused by the competent authority. So Article 310 operates with the check given by Article 311, and everything works, of course, under the oversight of the judiciary. Now let's talk in terms of the doctrine of pleasure of the governor. Can he dismiss the minister? See, things here emanates from Article 164, Clause 1. This article now is extremely important for you for the prelims exam. Article 164, Clause 1 reads like this: the chief minister shall be appointed by the governor, and the other ministers shall be appointed by the governor on the advice of the chief minister. And the ministers shall hold office during the pleasure of the governor. This has been written in the Constitution, Article 164, Clause 1. The ministers shall hold office during the pleasure of the governor. But in the constitutional scheme in which they are appointed solely on the chief minister's advice, the pleasure mentioned in the Article 164 is taken to mean the right of the chief minister to dismiss a minister, and not of the governor, and not really the right of the governor. The governor is bound to exercise his pleasure in accordance with the chief minister's advice. Thus, ministers holding office during the pleasure of the governor is essentially the power of the chief minister against his colleagues. How do we know this? We know this from the Shamsher Singh versus State of Punjab case of 1974. Here, a 7-judge constitution bench of Supreme Court held that the president and the governor should exercise their formal constitutional powers only upon and in accordance with the advice of their ministers, save in a few well known exceptional situations. Like after election, the president or the governor calls for the formation of the government. In those cases, they have discretion. But as long as the government is enjoying majority in the house, the governor has to act in accordance with the advice of the chief minister. The same was reiterated by the Supreme Court in Nabam Redia versus Deputy Speaker case of 2016. Supreme Court here, reiterating the same stand, cited the observations of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. Listen to this. The governor under the constitution has no function which he can discharge by himself. No function at all. While he has no functions, he has certain duties to perform. And I think the House will do well to bear in mind this distinction. No function at all. He has to act in accordance with the advice of the ministers led by Chief Minister. So, what does pleasure of the governor mean? Pleasure of the governor, first of all, does not mean that the governor has the right to dismiss the chief minister or any minister at his will. The governor has to give his pleasure as long as the government enjoys majority in the house. Meaning the governor has to be forcibly pleased by all the ministers and the chief minister. The governor can withdraw his pleasure only when the government loses the majority. Then he do not have to listen to the minister or the chief minister. He has the discretion to act. Let's take up another explained article from this week. Why is it raining so much in Australia? But we'll not take up the second part of the article. How has it affected the tournament favorites at World 2020? But from the perspective of physical geography, you must understand the factors which are leading to historical wettest days for some of the cities of Australia. There are three factors which are driving heavy rainfall changes in Australia presently. They are the El Nino Southern Oscillation ENSO, the Indian Ocean Dipole, and the Southern Annular Mode. Let's try understanding these factors one by one and see as to how each of them are affecting the rainfall pattern in Australia. The first factor is El Nino Southern Oscillation. As the name suggests, there is some kind of oscillation in the southern portion of the world, and that southern portion is in the Pacific Ocean. A large section of Pacific Ocean is in the equatorial region. So it gets heated up quite a lot, and you know that the latent heat capacity of water is very high. So such huge amount of water being present in the equatorial region increases the temperature of water. And that will help you understand the other term, oscillation. The thing that is oscillating here is the temperature of water. So the temperature oscillation is happening in the southern part of the world in the Pacific Ocean. So here it is. This is our Pacific Ocean. This is roughly representing the equator. And you can see vast amount of water in the equatorial region. You also know that on the surface in the equatorial region there are trade winds move from eastern side to the western side, and hence they are also called as easterlies. The water in the equatorial region, because of heating up, because of high insolation here, obviously gets heated up, and these heated up water gets transferred to the western side because of easterlies, the trade wind in the equatorial region. So the water pile in this region around Indonesia, New Zealand, and Australia gets heated up. When the pile of water gets heated up, you know there will be enhanced evaporation. Apart from that, there will be a low pressure building in the region. Because of the low pressure building in the region, the trade winds will rise from here, holding the moisture content in them. When they rise, there is cloud formation leading to rainfall in the region. So in the northern part of Australia, there is a good rainfall. As the wind keeps on rising, you would understand that they will become cooler. And you would know the top of the troposphere is very cold. So the wind becomes cooler and cooler, gets diverged, it starts moving horizontally. And then this cooler wind starts sinking down. And you know that the moisture carrying capacity of the air current is decided by its temperature. These cooler air current, they bring in no moisture. So in the equator and in the Peruvian coast, there is no rainfall because of these air currents. There is another factor at play here. When the warmer surface water current was getting removed by the trade wind to fulfill its place, the colder water current from deep down in the ocean rises up to take the place of the warmer current. So, just like there was a hot water pile here, there will be a cold water pile here. The cold water pile and the cooler air current is not helping to the cause of rainfall. So there will be good rainfall in the northern and the eastern coast of Australia, but there will be drought-like condition in the western coast of Southern America, mostly in the Ecuador and Peruvian coast. This wind current pattern, helped by the ocean current, is called as Walker's circulation. This is also considered as the neutral phase, the phase which is normal in nature. Although everything is constantly changing, but still, to have a reference point, this is how the circulation should be normally having. But imagine a scenario where the trade winds are weak. So, in those months of those years, the trade wind will not be potent enough to push the warmer surface current towards the eastern coast of Australia. So, these currents actually will be either going till the middle of the ocean, towards the eastern coast of the ocean, towards the western coast of South America. You understand, in the Walker circulation, this was the normal temperature pattern. Hotter towards the western side of Pacific Ocean and colder towards the eastern side of Pacific Ocean. But as we have seen earlier, it is called as El Nino Southern Oscillation. So the oscillation is of temperature, meaning this high and this low will be disturbed. It will be disturbed from the mean position, and sometime this side will become even more colder, sometime it will become hotter. When it becomes hotter, and when will it become hotter? When the hot surface current accumulates here itself. And this phase is called as El Nino. When the warmer surface current accumulates here, there will be low pressure on this side. There will be rise of air current on this side. There will be rainfall on this side. So El Nino is good for Peru. El Nino is good for Ecuador. It is good for the western coast of South America. And just the reverse of this, if the trade winds become stronger, then they will be pushing more amount of hotter surface current towards the eastern coast of Australia. So the low pressure here will be even more strong. The rise of air current will be even more. Cloud formation will be even more. The rainfall will be even more. And this scenario is called as La Nina. So when the Walker circulation is in the La Nina phase, or to say when the El Nino Southern Oscillation is in the negative phase, then the eastern side of Australia, including the northern borders, will experience more rainfall. And it has been 3 consecutive years when Australia has experienced the negative pole of ENSO, which is very rare. Previously, the negative pole of ENSO was in the duration of 3 to 8 years. But this time, there has been 3 consecutive years of negative pole of ENSO, meaning the La Nina phase of the Walker circulation. So obviously, the rainfall will increase. This is one of the factors. The second factor that we have seen earlier responsible for heavy rainfall in Australia is Indian Ocean dipole. As the name suggests, there has to be 2 poles. And the 2 poles here would be pole of temperature. Indian Ocean dipole is a phenomena in Indian Ocean similar to the El Nino Southern Oscillation phenomena in Pacific Ocean. The trade winds or the easterlies in the Indian Ocean, it is also going to bring the warmer surface ocean current to the eastern side. There's going to be water accumulation towards the eastern coast of Africa, just like it happened in the eastern coast of Australia. Because of warm water collection, there is going to be a low pressure. Because of low pressure, the air current is going to rise. The rising air current will lead to formation of clouds and hence the rainfall. But as the air current will keep on rising, it will become cooler and cooler as it's going to touch the troposphere. Troposphere is going to act as a barrier and the wind current is going to change the direction. The cooler air current will become heavier and it's going to start to sink. Sinking down in the Southeast Asian region and Eastern Australia region, there is going to be a drought-like situation. This is the normal air circulation of Indian Ocean dipole, popularly called as IOD. In the positive phase of Indian Ocean dipole, the easterlies are even more strong than the normal phase. So accumulation of water towards the eastern African coast is even more. And you understand that the rainfall here will be even more and the drought-like condition in the Southeast Asia and the western coast of Australia is going to be even more. But in the negative phase of Indian Ocean dipole, westerlies will be stronger than easterlies. So in the equatorial region, the net flow of air current will be towards east, coming from the direction of west. So westerlies are going to dominate. And in that scenario, you will understand that the warm surface ocean current would accumulate in this region. Rise of air current is going to be from this region, and rainfall drifting to south and southeast region of Australia. So the negative Indian Ocean dipole brings heavy rainfall in the south and the southeast region of Australia. And currently, we are having both the factors operating simultaneously. The negative pole of El Nino Southern Oscillation, meaning the La Nina condition operating towards the eastern coast of Australia, and the negative pole of Indian Ocean dipole that brings heavy rainfall in the southeast region of Australia. The rainfall pattern in Australia are basically governed by the El Nino Southern Oscillation phase and the Indian Ocean dipole phase. But there is another factor, the Southern Annular Mode or SAM. See, in the southern hemisphere, there is a belt of high pressure extending right around the globe in the tropics. It is also called as the subtropical ridge. And SAM refers to the unusual north or south shift of these winds. And this shifting of the winds away from the normal position can disrupt weather system across the southern hemisphere, including those that brings rainfall to the southern Australia. If this wind system heads towards south, called as the positive phase of SAM, the rain-bearing system will also head towards south. Under normal course, the current oscillation of SAM is crossing towards the southern coast of Australia. But if it moves southwards, called as the positive phase of SAM, then the rain-causing air pattern over Australia also shifts towards south. So the rainfall happening in this region may not be happening, rather a drought-like condition will appear in the southern coast of Australia. But at the same time, what can happen? Easterlies will be drawn more into the region. So the rainfall in the northern and the eastern coast will increase. So a positive SAM will increase the rainfall in the northeastern region of Australia. And it just has so happened that all these three factors have combined together and resulted in heavy rainfall in Australia presently. Now the question is why the patterns are changing and why they all three have coupled into a very less likely trinity. The answer to these questions are not very clear. But what we do understand, the temperature difference between the equatorial region and the polar region decreasing because of melting down of polar ice caps. And it is a fact that the temperature difference in the polar region and the equatorial region dictates the global wind pattern and also the ocean current pattern. When this primary factor gets hindered, the rest of the air circulation and the ocean current circulation will also get disturbed. So all these oscillations will deviate from their mean position. And we can see the heavy rainfall in Australia in the context of rising global temperature, melting of polar ice caps, and the general phenomena of climate change. There is an explained article, 2 more Indian beaches get blue flag certification. The 2 new beaches, both of them are from Lakshadweep. One is Minicoy Thundi Beach, the other is Kadmat Beach. Previously, 10 beaches already have got this certification. See, blue flag is kind of a eco label, and this label indicates a high environmental and quality standard in the beach or a marina or for sustainable boating tourism operator. These are the 3 things for which blue flag certification is given. This certification obviously is given on voluntary basis, meaning if you want to get certification, you have to apply for it. The certification is awarded by a Denmark-based non-profit organization called as Foundation for Environmental Education. The focus is on environmental education. And that is why in order to qualify for the blue flag certification, a series of stringent environmental, educational, safety and accessible criteria are required to be met. This is not an easy certification. Many countries takes 4 to 6 years to get it. So far, 46 countries have got the certification for different number of beaches, and Spain has got the highest number of certifications so far. The core idea of blue flag certification is to connect the public with their surroundings. How? By encouraging them to learn more about their environment. So one of the stringent requirements for certification is environmental education. Environmental education activities must be offered at the site. Apart from permanent display of information relevant to the site, in terms of biodiversity, ecosystem, and environmental phenomena. Environmental education is crucial in the puzzle of sustainable development. So we'll talk about environmental education a little bit more. But before that, I must inform you that the Environment Ministry is carrying out a program to give eco tag similar to Blue Flag, and that is called as BEAMS. BEAMS stand for Beach Environment and Aesthetics Management Services. This program of giving the eco label called as BEAMS is being run under Integrated Coastal Zone Management Project. And the certification that we have got in the record period of 2 years was not an easy thing. And the reason why we have got the certificate in a short time after applying it is because government had focused attention on it. And recently, in January 2020, the Government of India issued an extraordinary Gazette notification declaring a list of activities and facilities that would be permissible in the coastal regulation zone area of certain beaches, which have been identified for obtaining the Blue Flag certification. Just like government made the target to break into top 100 and now into top 50 of ease of doing business index, and government then worked for it, similarly this was the target that Government of India had. Proactive measures were taken and do's and don'ts for these beaches that were identified to obtain the Blue Flag certification were spelled out. And because of that effort, today we have beaches in India with Blue Flag certification. To prepare the beaches to get the Blue Flag certification, Government of India, as we have talked about, developed its own eco label called as BEAMS under the program of Integrated Coastal Zone Management Project. See, Integrated Coastal Zone Management was a concept that began in the Rio Summit of 1992. ICZM also became the subject of discussion in Agenda 21. And ever since that Rio Summit of 1992, many countries of the world have been adopting ICZM principles for management of coastal zones. And to meet India's commitment for the coastal management at the Rio Summit, Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change established a Society of Integrated Coastal Management. Society for Integrated Coastal Management works under the aegis of Ministry of Environment. And this society implements the broader scheme of integrated coastal zone management. And the eco label BEAMS was being implemented under the integrated coastal zone management. Now let's talk about environmental education in India. Environmental education in India formally began in 1983-84 when the Ministry of Environment established Environment Education Awareness and Training Program. It was started as a central sector scheme and it aimed to promote environmental awareness among all sections of society to mobilize people's participation for the conservation of environment. Environment Education Awareness and Training Program has 4 components. One is National Green Corps, then National Environment Awareness Campaign, then there's a program to conduct seminars and workshops, and there is National Nature Camping Program. National Green Corps basically is aimed at school students and it is implemented through Eco Club program. And this Eco Club program began in 2001. The purpose is to impart knowledge to school children through hands-on experience about their immediate environment and to develop compassion towards environment and to sensitize children on issues related to environment and development so as to build young cadres of students with sensitivity towards environment protection. So Eco Club program coming under the National Green Corps, coming under the Environment Education Awareness and Training Program of Ministry of Environment is the main institution for environmental education in India. Apart from that, for the prelims exam, you must be aware of a program called as GLOBE, Global Learning and Observation to benefit the environment. GLOBE is an international environmental science and education program, and in India, it is implemented under the agreement that Ministry of Environment has signed with the US government in 2000.
This is another explained article, Failing to Meet the Inflation Target. Why is RBI panel holding a special meeting on November 3? See, RBI generally put its report in the public domain. After the release of the report, RBI puts it up on the website. But this time, the report that RBI will be giving to the government as to why it is failing to meet the inflation target, whether or not that report will come in public domain, it's a matter of speculation. And perhaps that would be decided in the meeting of the RBI panel on November 3rd.
See, from the exam perspective, you have to know the following. The RBI Act 1934 was amended in 2016 to provide for adoption of flexible inflation targeting. And under this act, number one, central government, not RBI, central government shall determine the inflation target. Number two, in terms of consumer price index. You must remember inflation targeting is done in terms of CPI. And this is done once every 5 years. This inflation target is required to be met by Monetary Policy Committee. This is very important, and this recent development is good for Indian economy because the government and RBI would come on the same page. The target would be set by the central government and would be enforced or implemented by Monetary Policy Committee headed by the governor of RBI. The mechanism for this flexible inflation targeting comes from Monetary Policy Agreement. This has been signed between central government and RBI, and it provides that Monetary Policy Committee should maintain an ideal rate of inflation of 4%, which could increase or decrease by 2%. So the range for inflation is 2 to 6%. Such a flexible inflation targeting has been adopted in order to provide necessary autonomy to RBI to control inflation. But autonomy must be balanced with accountability. As per the Monetary Policy Agreement, if the rate of inflation is above 6% or below 2% for 3 consecutive quarters, then it would be termed as a failure of the RBI to maintain inflation. Accordingly, in order to ensure its accountability, RBI would be required to publish a report stating the following. Number one, the reason for the failure to achieve inflation target. Number two, remedial actions proposed to be taken by the bank. And number three, an estimate of time period within which the inflation target shall be achieved. And through this report, actually, accountability is enforced or matched with the autonomy that is given to RBI. The article highlights that rate of inflation as measured by CPI has been greater than 6% in last 3 quarters. So as per the Monetary Policy Agreement, this can be considered as RBI's failure to maintain inflation within the targeted range. Hence, accordingly, RBI should have come out with a detailed report explaining the reason for its failure and what actions it proposes to undertake. RBI must come up with such a report soon to enhance the credibility, transparency, and predictability of the institution.